Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 85. I've been reflecting on just how quickly this year is passing. We are halfway through April now, and International Nature Journaling Week is only a month and a half away. New blog posts are being added to the Nature Journaling Week website. So much is coming up. If you want to stay updated about all that's happening this year, you can visit www.naturejournalingweek.com and sign up to the newsletter, and then you won't miss any updates. The week will be from the 1st to the 7th of June, as always, and this year I'm really happy and excited about what's coming up, so stay tuned. Today's guest, Talweez Senghera, is a wanderer, writer, sketcher, traveller, and now nature journaler. Talweez has always loved nature and being connected with the outdoors, and has come to nature journaling fairly recently through the pandemic, and realized what a powerful tool this is for deepening her ability to notice and wonder and question the things she sees in the natural world. Talweez loves to travel and has some wonderful stories about nature journaling in the Australian outback and other special places. Let's listen. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very much looking forward to our chat.
Thank you for having me. I am actually quite honored that you would want to talk to me about nature journaling, because I'm one of those people who's come to it sort of unexpectedly through the pandemic. And
Yes.
it's been a big part of the last almost 2 years. But compared to all the other guests you've had on your show, I'm a very, very new beginner.
But that's perfect. And I think it's really important not just to, showcase experts or people who've been doing something for many years. I think that when someone's starting out, that's a really good place to share from. And I think it's great. So maybe the very first place I start is nature experiences in childhood. And I'm wondering about your childhood and nature connection in those early years.
So it's a little bit interesting because I grew up in Singapore and I spent the first 15 years of my life mostly in Singapore. And so my nature experiences, it's not really a big part of my childhood. We lived in an apartment. For most of that time, it was on the 10th floor. You might see the occasional bird flying past, but it wasn't really a big active part of a childhood. Like, for example, even speaking to my partner who grew up in Australia, in Adelaide, in a house with a big backyard and, with access to his grandparents' property. His childhood sounds completely different to mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually sounds a lot closer to my parents' childhoods, because they both Dad grew up in Malaysia and Mum in Singapore. And they had a much more outdoors kind of go play yourself kind of childhood. Whereas for me, and for my brother, it was mostly indoors. But, saying that as well, my grandmothers, both sides. So my mum's mum lived in one of the last sort of few pockets in Singapore that have houses that are on the ground, and it was actually on a hill that's behind the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, which is one of the bigger ones in Singapore. So when we would spend time there, which was quite a lot, there would be bats. Occasionally there would be monkeys coming into the backyard.
Wow.
And she was really active in her garden. So it was such a lovely thing to go there, because even though it was still in Singapore, it felt like a completely different place to all the apartments that we saw every day. And my dad's mother, she lived in Malaysia, and unfortunately she passed away when I was 12. So, but for those first 12 years, almost every month, maximum every 2 months, we would drive to her place. And Malaysia, even though it's so close to Singapore, it's such a different lifestyle, especially if you don't live in one of the big cities. And so she had a house and she had chickens and she had like a dog for a while, and we would just go play outside. So those were the more nature focused experiences. But day to day, it was more books, encyclopedias. We loved nature documentaries. And so we even had one of these pop-up tents that me and my brother would put up in the
Yes.
like living
Indoors.
room of this
Yeah.
apartment, and pretend we were outdoors every now and then.
Yes.
So it was something we really craved, but we just didn't have a lot of access to.
That is so interesting, and in fact, I've talked to a bunch of people who have said that nature documentaries and books that they got from the library about nature were actually a substitute when nature couldn't be found where they live, so that's really interesting that you say that.
Yeah, for me, I think it was a lot of it was also, I loved reading. And the experiences of the kids that I was reading about was so different to my childhood.
Mhm.
And that was another, avenue for yearning for being outdoors and
Mm.
for not having all my life sort of be around school and home and school and home. So, whenever there was anything like nature documentaries or even just TV shows, I don't know if you're familiar with The Wild Thornberrys, but my brother and I were obsessed with that show. And it's basically a Nickelodeon cartoon about a guy who is a nature documentary producer. And he and his wife and his two kids and a little monkey that they've adopted along the way kind of travel around the world in this combi. And everywhere. They even had an episode on Australia. And so it was just not only a window into different worlds and different places, but nature in different parts of the world that I would not have otherwise come across at such a young age.
And what about creativity in your early life? Has creativity been with you from the beginning?
I think so. I think like a lot of kids, everyone kind of loves picking up the crayons and drawing. And I do remember getting into trouble for even using mum's lipsticks and drawing on the wall once. But it was just one of those things that people accepted that kids were going to do, but it was never really a thing that you kind of cultivated or
Mhm,
encouraged or
mhm,
did anything more than that. Um, but over the years, so we did art classes, and in school I was always in the art, like the extracurriculum art classes and things that you could do. In one way or another, it's always been a part of my life. Even when I haven't been drawing or painting, I've kind of weirdly in those periods I kind of sought out things like dance or something else. It's always been something, but I've never really kind of connected the dots properly or really invested that time into drawing and painting beyond when I was a little kid.
mhm,
And
mhm.
the last time I remember actually really drawing a lot was in high school before I started nature journaling again. So it was a good 17 years, I think, or 15 years before I picked up the pencils again.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that. So it sounds like 2020 was a really big year for coming back to art, coming back to nature, and I'd love for you to sort of tell that story about how that happened.
um, okay, so it kind of starts a little bit before 2020.
Okay.
At the end of 2019, so I'd spent 18 months in Samoa on a volunteer assignment with the Australian Volunteer Program, and then that's where I met my partner, and he was volunteering in Fiji. So I went over after my assignment ended to Fiji and spent a few months with him. But towards the end, like in December 2019, we went to one of the outer islands, Vanua in Fiji, and it's just, I mean, anywhere in the Pacific. Like looking back, one of my little regrets is that I didn't have painting when I was living there because
Mm,
it
mm.
was just so much I would have loved to capture. Um, but there was this wading bird. I think it was a crane or an eagle of some sort. And we were just sitting on this beach with really quite shallow for quite a while, and this bird was just there. And I had my book, but I just didn't feel like reading. I had to go get a pen and a pencil and just a blank piece of paper that I had and just try and sketch it. And it was so bad. It was just like a little outline and a silhouette, long beak, long neck, But it was the first kind of spark that I had in a long time, really
Mm.
wanting to draw this thing and capture that moment that I just didn't feel photographs would do justice to, because it didn't. Photographs just don't capture the feeling of being in that place. And just the wonder of, I watched that bird for like 20 or 30 minutes as it just
Mm.
walked about on the beach, and didn't really think about it again for a while. And then was off to Indonesia, and my assignment was going to start in Samarinda in Borneo. And I was really looking forward to that because it was conservation organization that I was working for, a really small place, and in Borneo, who doesn't want to go there? And so I was so excited about the nature aspect of that assignment and being there for 6 months. But obviously then the pandemic happened before anything really started. And we got home in March 2020. We chose to come back to Perth, which is where my family is. And we were very lucky in Perth. Unlike growing up in Singapore, in Perth, there was just so much nature. And so that part of my life was just, constantly being fascinated by all of the different birds and things. And we live really close to a lake, which has, swans breeding every year, and egrets and spoonbills and ibises and all these other birds that come around there. So it was just really nice after the craziness of the last couple of months of, being excited to go somewhere new, starting a new assignment, and then being pulled out of it under the circumstances of the pandemic to just do nothing and enjoy being in nature. And after everyone, I had that whole clean up everything phase, and that was done. And then I was just looking for something to do, like to really sink into. I just sat at the table and decided I wanted to draw. So I picked up all color pencils and acrylics that I'd had from like 15 years ago. I just sketched, like doodled the way I'd always doodled in the sides of my books, vines and flowers and just things that were imaginary but pretty. And after a couple of days of doing that, I started looking up, okay, how to doodle and how to draw. And I started just drawing plants. And there was actually a video I watched while I was in Indonesia by a YouTuber called Struthless, who was talking about the best drawing advice he'd ever gotten. And I wasn't even thinking about drawing at the time. But he talked about just focusing on one thing. So for him, it was an ibis. And he talked about the journey of just drawing an ibis for one whole year and how that just evolved, because he knew he was always going to draw an ibis. Suddenly he started incorporating different things into it. And then it became a bit of a political commentary. And it was just like picking that one thing that helped him grow in this. So that, I remembered that. And I decided, okay, I can't really focus on just one bird, but I will paint flowers. I will draw flowers. That's the one thing. And I did, like every day for about a month. And after a while, I was like, oh, I have all these photos of these amazing tropical flowers that I've recently been seeing. So then I started trying to draw them rather than just doodling, whatever. And then that led to, we're seeing all these amazing complex Australian flowers. There were wattles blooming. There were all the, so many different Banksias and grevilleas and, all of the stringy, crazy, weird Australian flowers that we have. And I was like, maybe I can try this. And it was just one thing kind of led to another.
Yes.
And in that process, I kind of somehow discovered the nature journaling community. I think it might have been either John Muirlaw's book on how to nature journal and draw plants, and also just seeing other people who were trying to draw or who had drawn Australian flowers, and kind of, it's just a little rabbit hole that opened up. And it's just not stopped. So the flowers led to birds, led to, color, and trying to draw landscapes and paint landscapes. And it's just really surreal about almost 2 years later to look at the things I'm sketching and painting and doing now compared to that very first little silhouette of the egret that I drew in 2019. It's just worlds apart. I would not have thought that I could do what I'm doing at the moment, even just skill level wise. But
yes.
But I think the bigger impact has been how much more I notice. Just being outdoors has always been really nice. You just enjoy being in nature. But I don't think I really noticed it. I don't think I really kind of stopped to wonder about the plants or wonder about the birds. Or, in one case, there was a grevillea we saw in Lesmurdie Falls National Park, and it just was this crazy little, it looked like a bunch of grapes sort of hanging down. And I started looking into it, and apparently it's a specific shape because of the way it's evolved with specific pollinators and bees, and that level of detail and that level of, thousands of years of evolution is just impossible to not be amazed by. And I just wouldn't have thought to even ask those questions, wonder why the plants are shaped that way. It was, I guess, in a way, it was coming back to, I did biology in year 11 and 12 and then didn't think about it again afterwards, but I loved it while I was doing it. And suddenly I was remembering all of these things that we were talking about in biology, and then remembering taxonomy and remembering like, like evolutionary patterns and things. And I was like, I did really enjoy this. Why did I not, why has this not been a bigger part of my life? But I guess I just thought about it as a subject and then put it away.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
life took over. So that's been just so much fun. It's just going on a walk and noticing these birds that I would never have really paid attention to otherwise, and noticing what they're doing, just being able to watch them and sketch them and wonder.
That's delightful. It's really a wonderful observation that you've just said, that you can go outside and appreciate and have a nice time in nature. And yet, when you start nature journaling, even the mindset of nature journaling, it sort of turns on your curiosity. It turns on your desire to know more and to have
Yeah.
a little look deeper. And that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, for some people, it happens through even just taking photographs. So I kind of
Yes.
sometimes contrast my experience with that of Scott's, because he's always loved taking photographs, and he's got so much patience to just sit there and wait for a bird to just be still enough to get that great
Mhm.
photograph. And that's never really did me with photography. I'm very impatient with that, especially with the smartphones. It's like, I want to capture the sunset, I want to capture this view, but I've never really stopped to like really try and capture a bird or
Mm-mm.
observe it. So for me, photography was just like a filter on the world. It wasn't really another way of engaging with it, whereas for Scott, it really was. But I found myself kind of seeing things more the way, like the curiosity that he brought to photography. It only
Mm.
really sparked for me when I started drawing and painting. Um, and really, it was the patterns. It was really the patterns in things that I was excited, and I still am mostly excited by, why, how the flowers are shaped a certain way. Or one of the really crazy things was during the wildflower season that year, we were still in Perth, and I started seeing these grevilleas that had like leaves that were shaped more like hakias, and it's almost like they were being mixed and matched. We had just so much
Oh, wow.
biodiversity. And I'd started seeing that, okay, that shape looks a bit more like this other plant I saw, but the flower looks totally like this other plant that has very different leaves. I was just fascinated by all that. I still don't know the answers to most of those things, but just the sparking of the questions
Yes.
is what makes it really fun.
Yes, and Perth is famous for its amazing wildflowers, and it's something I've always dreamed of seeing the wildflowers near there.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even really go sort of out into the really big wildflower displays. It was so John Forest National Park is about 45 minutes out from where we are, and it's just in the hills of Perth. And I've been there many times before, but never in the wildflower season, and it's such a different experience. We were there for hours, and literally, we would walk like a meter, and there'd be another flower, and we'd walk another meter, and there'd be another flower that we hadn't
Yes.
seen, or little orchids that were growing just on the ground, which I didn't even know we had native orchids in Australia, but we have tons.
Yeah.
Um, it's just things that I just would never have known to look for.
Yeah. So it seems to me from discovering your blog and your posts on social media that you are a lifelong learner, and you seem to be learning new skills like gouache and pen and ink and things like that. But more than that, it seems like you're really motivated to learn and understand things about the world. Does that feel true?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I was starting the blog, and most of that was because I was learning all these different things or exploring all these different swatching things. And when I was trying to look for resources, there were some there, and I found some really great people who've been very great, generous with their knowledge. But then there were other questions that I had, or things that I was like, oh, I would have loved another swatch about this, or I would have loved
Mhm.
something else. And so I just thought, I can write something about this when I feel
Yeah.
like it. But I was trying to reflect on why it was that even though creativity has always been a part of my life in one way, shape, or form, why it's never really kind of come together before this, why it hasn't really been a practice. And part of that is just I never really thought about it that way. There was just all these other things that you're supposed to do in life that were taking over most of my energy. But a big part of it was there just wasn't that motivation. I would draw and sketch things to learn how to draw and sketch things. And then I would get to a skill level that I was like, all right, I'm satisfied. And then that would be it. There was no further purpose for it. And nature journaling and sketching and actually being excited. So it's that feedback loop that I think a lot of your guests have talked about as well. You go outside, you see something, you get curious, you want to sketch about it. And then the process of sketching brings up even more questions, and you start wondering, okay, what's the pattern? Or sometimes it's like I'll see a skink and I'm like, that looks similar to that other skink, but is it the same genus? How related are they? And it's just this continuous cycle. So it's that learning bit, the continuous, I guess, something new to always learn is what was really missing, because I'm excited when my skill level in sketching grows, because it's a tangible thing. Looking back on your old sketchbooks, you can see the progress, but it's not in itself a motivator. Like I have no aspirations to be the best artist of birds or the best artist of flowers or anything like that. But I am excited to be able to depict them more accurately, or depict the parts of them more accurately that I find fascinating, because it captures that moment and it sparks more questions. And it's a reference to go back to, like, how similar was this? Or, when we were on Christmas Island for 6 months, we really wanted to go there even before the pandemic. And when they had the travel bubble open up, we just went and we ended up staying for 6 months. And during that time, I spent a lot of time volunteering with the national park up there, and also with a local sort of recycling center. And it is such an amazing place, nature-wise.
Maybe for international listeners, maybe you could describe where it is and what was drawing you to go there.
So it's this tiny island just by itself, this small little landmass. I can't remember how small it is, but it's really tiny. You can probably drive around the whole island in about an hour. And it's probably slightly closer to Indonesia than it is to Australia. But either direction, there's nothing for thousands of kilometers. And the closest set of islands are Cocos Islands, Cocos Keeling Islands, which are to the west. So it's this isolated little island that has not had human population until the 1700s. So it's been just completely untouched by people, development, any of that. And nature has just been allowed to evolve there by itself. And it's probably most famous for the annual crab migration that a lot of people have done documentaries on, including David Attenborough.
And at these times, the crabs just come by the thousands, right? They just sweep over the island.
Yeah. Well, see, I had this weird idea. So in Perth, I had a couple of friends who had grown up there and then moved to Perth. And so, and also just watching the documentaries, my impression of it was that the crabs would sort of start at one side of the island and then go across it. But these crabs are always there. They live on the island. And it's more that they're going from the forests, and all the way around the island, which is, about 60 or 70% of the island is still forest, and most of that is national park, which is amazing. But they kind of just, from everywhere, they migrate down to the oceans. So it's basically this crab migration that kind of just goes to the beaches on all sides. And there's the main town center, the roads. During the big part of the season, everything is covered. It's crabs everywhere, and and the locals are so loving of these crabs. Like, they will stop. Everyone has rakes in their car during the season. They get off, and the national park have the rangers literally sweeping crabs out of the way.
Wow.
People who live there know the protocol of how to kill the least amount of crabs as you possibly can by accident. And everyone is just so conscious of this all the time, from the kids to the adults.
Were you there during this period?
Yeah, so that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to go then.
Okay.
It's very unpredictable when they actually migrate, because it's dependent on the rains and, how much rain they actually get. So we knew we kind of wanted to be a bit flexible. And we were lucky to be there. It was a smaller migration than most years, but it was still it was amazing. But the thing that I was really surprised by, and I think the thing that nature journaling specifically brought to the whole experience of being on the island for me, was that we'd gone there expecting to be amazed by the crab migration, and we were. It was amazing. And, you know, Scott was hoping to be able to see some whale sharks because they kind of come through there during that time as well. And we did. We both got to accidentally swim with whale sharks, which was amazing.
Wow. How do you accidentally swim with a whale shark?
Well, we were on, like, so people do go out and snorkel, and everyone there is really excited when the whale sharks come around. But because it's so few people, it's not really a big, you know, like exercise. People don't really have these big like whale shark watching expeditions. There's a couple of companies that take people out on snorkeling and diving tours, but for me it was a bit by accident because we'd gone on this dive. I don't dive. I have asthma, and my asthma is triggered by changes in temperature, so I've been told I can't. So I was just snorkeling by myself while everyone else was diving, and I looked to the left. There was this baby whale shark just staring at me. It just kind of, I didn't even notice it. I was happily just sort of, you know, wading the water at that point, just waiting for the boat to come pick me up again, and staring at the thousands of red-footed boobies that like are up in the canopy. And then I looked to my left, and it was just there. It was a juvenile, but you know, still like really, and they're so docile. They're so,
yeah.
It was amazing. It was such an amazing. And then Scott had something similar when we'd just gone out on the boat with some friends, and you know, they were diving, and then on the way back it was like, oh, a whale shark, and that was a much bigger one.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you were saying you had these expectations of the island, and then
Yeah.
nature journaling had helped you
Well,
see.
so I mean, I probably just alluded to it a little bit. That island is amazing. It's amazing beyond my wildest expectations, because there's just so much there, from all the different types of crabs, many of which are endemic to that island, and you won't see them anywhere else. But then the seabirds, being like this island in the middle of nowhere, it's actually a really big rest point for a lot of seabirds, but also it's got a lot of cliffs, a lot of lovely spots for them to nest. And so red-footed boobies, brown boobies, frigate birds, so the greater frigate birds, the lesser frigate birds, the Christmas Island frigate bird, which is an endemic one just to there, the Abbott's booby, which is this giant booby that nests in the canopy, not on the so it nests on the tallest bits of the canopy, and it only nests on Christmas Island now. It doesn't nest anywhere else. Its range has been so limited. But they're there, and you know, there's so with the national park, I volunteered with the lizards program. So they have there were 6 skinks that were on the island, so 6 lizards, and of them 4 were endemic, I think.
Wow.
If I'm not mistaken. But unfortunately, one of them is extinct now. They weren't able to save it. 2 of them, they literally got to them at the last corner of the island that they could be found, and managed to get enough, like I think 60 to 70 of them, like enough breeding pairs. And then they went back like about a month or 2 later, and they were just, that's it, they were gone. And there's one that's it's still surviving in the wild by itself, but a lot of that has been due to accidentally introduced predators. And so the national park there has like a captive breeding program that they run for the blue-tailed skinks and the listed geckos, and they do that in conjunction with Taronga Zoo in Sydney as well. And so my job was just to help look after these little skinks and geckos, and you know, it's just, I never thought I would be so interested in reptiles, or even care that much about these tiny lizards, but it was fascinating, and I kept going back to volunteer, and I just love them. In fact, on the blog, you'll see the little like logo that I've created. That is sort of a stylized version of the Lister's gecko.
Amazing. That sounds like a life-changing trip.
It really was, and it was very unexpectedly so, because I always knew it was going to be an interesting place to go, and sort of my family has a bit of a personal connection there. It didn't really go as far as I would like, but there was a family story that my great-grandfather, so my mum's granddad, was posted there in the Second World War, and he never returned after the war. So in trying to go trace his steps, her uncle ended up in Singapore and then introduced the guy who ended up being her dad to her mum and all of that. So there was just this whole connection with that island. And I was kind of hoping to see if I could find out more about that story, or if I even have confirmation if he was even there. So it's still something I'm chasing up on the side, but it was just an amazing place, and I knew I would always have something that was going to be special there. But I didn't really realize the extent of it, and a lot of that was because of nature journaling, because you'd be sitting and watching these birds, and normally I'd be fascinated by them, yay, cool, but I wouldn't have been nearly as interested in watching them, watching how they were flying, watching what the times of day they were going. And we were actually lucky enough to be there during the mating season of the frigate birds.
Oh, wow.
So the males have these like red pouches that kind of extend during their mating season, and that was just so fun to watch. But then they do this dance as part of their mating ritual. So these birds, frigate birds with these red pouches kind of, up in the canopy. And because the island is literally just forest, sometimes beach, cliff, ocean, like it's all condensed into such a small space. So you'd be sitting on a beach and you can see these birds in the canopy. And, these females would fly past, and suddenly like 7, 8, 9, 10 of these males sitting in the canopy would do a little dance and almost fall off the branches in trying to do that, and have these like really interesting kind of trilling sound that they made as part of it. And that was just really cool to watch. But again, because of nature journaling, I was really, I was just sitting there and observing. And I thought initially that they were doing that every time like a bird would pass or a frigate bird would pass. But then, no, it was just the females. Literally, they could tell if it was another male. Some of them are juveniles and they didn't have the distended, but it was only the females. The females would come past and they'd all go, and then she would go around and she would sit next to one of them, and another one would come and they'd all go again and sit next to another one, and then they'd fly off for some reason, and then fly back around and then go sit next to another one. It's just kind of exploring their options, maybe. I'm not sure.
That's amazing.
But it was just so fun to watch that display for about half an hour or so. And it's hard to imagine what it would have been like if I hadn't had nature journaling at the time, because you're trying to retroactively put yourself in a different frame of mind. But just having the journals, I think I filled up 4 journals while I was there, and sketching and chatting to so many people locally who were so passionate about all the different things that they were researching or working for, or it's such a small group of people working at the national park there that they're all fantastic to talk to and really amazing. And even within the community, there's so many people who are so passionate about this rock that they live on, that they call home, that has so much to offer.
Wow. So it sounds to me like travel is a really big part of your life. Can you tell me about travel and what that means for you?
So it's actually very similar to what you talked about in terms of, for me, travel as well is a lot about learning. It's a lot about, I guess, trying to understand and also be exposed to different people, different ways of life, different cultures. And some of that is just because it's pretty and it's interesting, and I love languages, and I'm really fascinated by how people make culture or language, or the similarities and the patterns with which language and clothes and food have dispersed over the world. But another part of it is just, I was very lucky to grow up in a place that is multicultural. It's not as multicultural as parts of Australia are, but then in another way, you just can't get away from it in Singapore. Everything, it was just a melting pot of food, of culture, of everything intermingling, and even Singlish, which is I guess, a dialect of English that is mostly spoken in Singapore. It has words from Tamil and Malay and,
Mm.
Hokkien and like everything mixed into one. And you don't even think about it. That's just what life is, right? Like you grow up eating all these different things. And so thinking about diversity was a little bit different because I never had to think about it. And in a sense, like growing up in a minority, even within that context. So being Punjabi and Sikh were kind of not really one of the major religious or language or ethnic groups in Singapore. But that was just, I had access to this whole other culture as well, in addition to all the things that were in front of me. And that's always been a big part of just life, just everyday normal life. And so I've always been really fascinated by different places because I knew the richness of what was around me, and there was so much more to see around the world, and so many more different, places to explore, people to talk to, life experiences to try and understand and interact with and learn about, and all of the fun stuff that comes with travel that way. And I think the biggest thing, though, is just travel, for me at least, forces you to kind of confront your own biases.
Yes.
Everyone has them. And, it forces you to kind of really, really think about what it is that you believe, or it doesn't even have to be as serious as something that you believe, but what it is that you've just accepted as part of life that is not part of life for other people in the world.
Yes.
And I find my life richer for that. And that's, I guess, the draw card for travel.
Mm-mm. And you talked on your blog about learning and getting into doing landscapes. And landscapes can be a really great way to capture the essence of somewhere, especially when you're traveling or you're experiencing a new place. A landscape can be a really wonderful way to capture something about that place.
Yeah. And it's something that I've been very scared of, actually, for a long time. I remember even like as a kid sitting in Malaysia, like on a beach with the family and trying to capture the beach, the palms. I'm doing an okay-ish job, I had the like little lines for the palms and the needles coming down, but it was never good enough. It just never felt like it was right. And even later on, when I tried to, paint scenes for art and things, like the landscapes were always just really difficult.
Yes.
And so I just never looked at them. Never, even when I started sketching, I was like, I'm not touching that. I'm just going to focus on this small little thing, like a flower or a leaf or a plant, something that I can, dissect with my eyes, or
Yes.
with different angles of a photograph, or that I can actually really get into. But now that I think the biggest thing was when we've been camping through Australia so we went to the Flinders in about June, July last year, and spent 3 or 4 weeks out there. And then from September to about November, we were kind of making our way from Adelaide up through to Darwin slowly.
Wow.
And I'd just wake up in the morning and want to capture the campsite, want to capture something, of where I was. And I didn't always have the whole day to sit there and paint. So I forced myself to just like, okay, 20 minutes, what am I going to capture? And that's been the shift in the mindset. It's just been like, simplify, okay, that's the tree that I want to get, and the rest of it could just be little green blobs in the background.
Yes.
It's still something that I'm working on, but I think because I've always been drawn to the pattern and the detail, it's been very difficult to simplify, and that was my biggest challenge with landscapes. There's just so much to see. You never really know what to start with and what to focus on, and how much detail to put in, and I'm sure I'll get there. But I've really enjoyed gouache for that, because I can't really take it out very much, and I'm getting better with the watercolor. But with gouache, it doesn't matter if you make a tiny mistake, you can always go back in.
Go over.
And it just has a bit more of like depth to it. Like, maybe depth is not the right word, but there's like more vibrancy and heft to the color. And I
Mm-hmm,
find
mm-hmm.
that sometimes, I'm sure there are amazing watercolorists out there that can capture, the wonderful colors. But I'm always just a little bit disappointed, particularly with how vibrant the oranges in Australia are. And not being able to capture that adequately with my watercolors was just a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when you talk about traveling through Australia, there is so much color. And I mean, especially if you're camping or doing a lot of outdoor stuff, the landscape itself is just a part of your everyday. And there's so much sky and there's so much expanse. And so it seems really natural that a landscape in your journal should be one of the elements of every day. I really like that image.
Yeah. So I mean, I have, I will continue doing that, for especially the camping sketches. So we'll be going camping again in a couple of months. But the thing that I did interestingly miss while doing that, though, is that in trying to capture just the landscapes, um, I found it very daunting to try and capture the birds I was seeing on site. It was almost like two different mindsets, and
Okay,
I
interesting.
didn't feel like I felt like I was in this mode of like simplifying everything, and I just couldn't get myself to do that for the birds.
Mm.
And so I just gave up on it after a while. I was like, I'm not going to stress about this. I'm just going to take all the photos, and then now that we've been in a place in an apartment for a few months, I've just been going back through all those photos and filling in the rest of my pages with all these. I guess that was another really surprising thing. Is just the amount of bird life there was in the desert.
Yes.
Um,
That's something you don't really think about until you're out there. Hey, I've never visited the Australian desert, but I have seen photos of flocks of budgerigars and things like that.
Yeah, and I guess again, thinking about it in hindsight, it makes sense because there's these pockets of water, or even just the tiniest bit of water in like a little dried up river. It attracts all these birds because
Mm.
it's such a hard resource to come by. And so we were camping in one spot, I remember, and there was black, so red-tailed black cockatoos. There were like cranes and the egrets, and there was all the budgies. Zebra finches were everywhere. A few different kinds of birds of prey, which I didn't really get to identifying, and then just tons of other birds that would come in and come through, and
Wow.
cockatiels. Big flocks of cockatiels. Uh, and I was just sitting there going, I don't think I've ever seen this much diversity in one place, just all there.
That's so interesting because you think of the desert as sort of barren, I guess. It is the stereotype, but it's not that at all.
No, no, it's not. I mean, there are parts of it that, you didn't see anything. And I was actually very surprised the whole time we were camping in the Northern Territory. I didn't see a single kangaroo, which was a
Okay.
common sight in the south. Um, but the birds, anytime there was water, they were like, you'd hear the birds before you even got to the water. And again, that's one of those things. Part of it comes from traveling, but another part of it is just sitting there and like sketching and thinking, like,
Mm.
how cool is this? And just asking all the questions, like, why are they here? Why are they doing that specific thing? And then it was really funny because we'd watch the budgies for a little while, and they would come in like a little flock, and they would sip their water, and then they would fly off, and then another group of like zebra finches would come
Oh,
in, they
wow.
would fly off, and then sometimes they were kind of like half flocks of each, but it was almost like they were doing this bit of a tag team thing.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So it sounds to me like color is important to you, and I would love to hear more about your relationship with color.
Yes. It's an interesting question. So color is really important to me, and I find it, I think I might have mentioned on the blog as well, when I was doing the ink drawing course on, I think it was Philip Harris's course, and it was great. I love drawings like that. I love seeing people who can work in pen and ink and only pen and ink and add so much depth. But for me, I just can't imagine a painting or a drawing without color. It's just like something's missing here, and
Yeah.
especially with because in that one I was drawing the Spinifex pigeon, and the beauty about that pigeon is it's the same color as the red desert, the surroundings.
Mm,
It's just,
mm.
and so I really wanted to capture that against the Kings Canyon, and how similar those colors were, and how um, it's almost like the bird kind of evolved from that landscape in a way. And it probably did. It's probably that color for a reason.
Yes.
And so that's actually been one of the biggest struggles with the materials that I've ended up trying to use or trying to explore, because when I guess I started, like, I really was hesitant to try watercolor for all the reasons that people are. It's just such a finicky medium. It's, and everyone's probably, like, anyone who's dabbled in art's probably got like some horrible experience of watercolor going wrong, especially when they were a kid. And so I remember this like one painting actually that I was trying to do of the beach, and it was great. And I had put this beautiful like blue sky in, and then a bit of yellow drops into it, and suddenly my blue sky has a patch of green. And so it's just stuff like that. You can't fix that in
and you can't
watercolor.
correct it.
And so I was really hesitant to try watercolor because I just didn't want to be having to struggle with that. And I also really like bright, vivid colors and capturing that. But in the end, I kind of just decided to give it a go because it's the most portable thing that you can have. And that's a big, it's a really big consideration for what I take with me. I want this to be a part of my life going forward. And because I'm on the road so much, it needs to be something that I can take outside with me. So I kind of just forced myself to do it. I thought, okay, get some actual like artist quality pigments, and I looked into what to get, and people do make beautiful, vibrant paintings with watercolors. So I was like, it's possible. You're just going to have to commit to like putting in the effort to learning it. And I did. I spent a few months, and I was lucky to have that time to do that. Just kind of trying to find ways to make the colors the way I wanted them and get them vibrant. And so I kind of came to this understanding with watercolor and also how I had to approach it, of like just accepting the mistakes when they happen and just leaving it at that. But it's never really been the medium that kind of makes me really happy.
Okay.
And so gouache has actually been that for me. I've kind of dabbled in it a few years ago, and then now that we've been sitting in one place again for a while, I keep finding myself just going back to it because it handles a lot more like acrylics, but like watercolor, you can actually go back in to it, which you can't with acrylics. And it's just a lot more vibrant, like just straight away, it's a lot more vibrant. And you can get this really kind of almost, I can't really think of a different word for it, but like a cartoony kind of whimsy quality with it really easily. And I always think of like Studio Ghibli kind of idea when I think of gouache. So I still haven't found a way to take it outside with me though, because despite the number of palettes I've tried, it's just not easy to keep from crumbling and cracking. And even the palettes that I have found that are airtight, so it keeps the paints fine, and they stick in their little wells, so it's not contaminating everything else. But then there isn't a little like an attachment where you can actually mix the colors, and so it's an ongoing struggle. I'm sure I'll get it some way, but there is a set of watercolors that I do like, and I keep with me, and I have also a small set of watercolor pencils just to add a bit of extra if I needed to. But it's an evolving relationship. I do really like color, but I'm kind of finding, and actually it's a really interesting thing, because I remember one of your guests was talking about like restrictions and imposing restrictions and actually really focusing on the materials that you've got, and that's really been quite helpful, because there was initially when I decided, okay, I'm going to have to give watercolor a go, because I can't take all of these acrylics with me and have to or all of these markers, like alcohol markers, with me. It's just not practical. It's not something I want to do. So really forcing myself to like, okay, these are the medium. This is what I've got to work with, and I will do that. Was great. It was really great. It actually opened up this possibility of watercolor, and I know how to use it now. Let's just put it and beyond that, it's just exploration and seeing what else I can include.
So it sounds like you reserve your gouache for at home when you can spread out and use your all the materials you want, and watercolor reluctantly is your is in your travel kit. I wonder what are the sort of tools that you love to use when you're traveling, when you're outdoors, when you're field
Yeah.
sketching, that sort of thing?
So a lot of the time it's watercolor,
Mm.
but it really just depends on what I've remembered to put in my little kit. and and that's been really quite good as well. So sometimes I've just had like a set of watercolor pencils, and that really helped at the start when I was really starting to get into watercolor, because water control took a little bit of time.
Mm.
And learning how to use the water brush, especially, like I didn't actually start with normal brushes when I started with watercolor again. I knew I'd have to use water brushes a lot if I was going to take this on the road. So I was like, I'm just going to jump in and try to work out this specific tool, and it worked. But initially, I was just very daunted by doing that outside. So a small set of watercolor pencils kind of helped bridge that gap and just allowed me to
Yes.
draw a little bit before committing to watercolor itself. But I found that in the last 6 months or so, I haven't really touched my watercolor pencils as much, and um, it's, I guess, it's an evolving relationship of what I feel like painting with at the
Yeah.
time. Outdoors at the moment, it's mostly a small set of watercolors that I've got, and the colors in them changes depending on where I'm going as well.
Mhm.
So there's
That's interesting.
yeah, so depending on when I went to Christmas Island, I took out some of the more like Australian kind of muted greens and
Mhm.
put in like a vibrant phthalo green yellow shade, and just it's like I don't know what the color's going to be like there, but I can bet it's going to be tropical greens.
Yes.
And so and there was that, and there was a few different like sort of brighter kind of colors that I put in,
Mm.
and I didn't really have any granulating colors because I just weren't really feeling them at the time. But when we were coming up into the Northern Territory, I was like, I really want some easy to use like earthy oranges and reds, and so those kind of went in,
Wow.
and I started putting in a bit more um, granulating colors and trying to explore that, because it's just so much fun when you're doing a landscape to just add that
Yes.
texture in without having to actually add texture in.
Mm-mm.
um, so yeah, watercolor for outdoors is the main thing that I've kind of come to, and I actually don't even bother with pencil sketches anymore. I've just kind of um, I just draw with watercolor if I want to draw.
Yeah, I love that because, we can all get so hung up on drawing and then rubbing things out, trying to make it perfect, and then adding the color as an afterthought to this perfect drawing. But that takes so much time, and it also sort of takes you out of the moment of experiencing what you're looking at.
Yeah, and I think I've gotten around that a little bit by thinking of my sketchbooks as different to finished paintings or
Yes.
things. I do like doing finished paintings, but I never attempt to do them outside. I never attempt to do them in the moment. So the sketchbooks or even little A6 postcard watercolor, I love them because
Yeah.
they're so easy to just take, and it's not as thick as a sketchbook, and you can just sit there and in 20 minutes you've got something that resembles a landscape.
Yeah.
And that's been really freeing, because if I sat there and thought this is going to be a finished painting, I would never get anywhere.
Yes.
So the outdoors, the sketchbook, it's just I'm trying to capture this moment, and that's more important than the detail or the color. Or sometimes I do take creative liberties with the colors because it's more about how I'm seeing them. So I'll like play up an orange, or like
Yes.
make a bark more blue than it is, or
Yeah.
and then if I want to paint it again, I'll sit at home and be like, okay, now I can worry about the pencil sketch, and it's a whole different thinking process.
Yes, I like that. It's two different types of creativity, and in the moment outdoors, it can be something very free.
Yeah, and again, it's like the detail, because for example, with the skeets on Christmas Island, I really, really wanted to capture like the tiny little black dots that line the
Yeah.
vertebra, and you can't do that outside. It's just
Yeah.
to get it accurate, to sit there like that took me just probably an hour for the little skeets that I was doing with my 0.1 fine liner literally sitting there and like doing each dot in the spot that I could see it. And I really enjoy that. It gets me into a state of flow, which has been the other really wonderful aspect of
Yes.
nature journaling is, there's that aspect of really enjoying it when you're outside, and the mindfulness that comes from really observing.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that actually, your connection with mindfulness and nature.
Yeah, and it's always been there. When you go for a walk, it doesn't matter like how you're going for a walk. If you're outdoors in nature, I think there's plenty of studies that show that it's really beneficial anyway. But with nature journaling, I just found that it's almost a little bit meditative if you sit and you observe. Even if I'm not sketching, sometimes I just don't feel like sketching. You just notice so much more, and it's in that noticing and observing that you kind of forget anything else you might be thinking of. You forget who else might be there. You're just kind of there in that moment. And sometimes it's even just the sound. So
yeah,
I got like a little tiny microphone to attach to my phone, just because I was wanting to capture the sounds of being in the forest or being somewhere. And so that's been the mindfulness aspect of being outside. But then the other side of it comes when I want to do a painting and actually put in all the details on the feathers or all the details on the body of the lizard, or get the colors right. And that's really meditative in its own way, because I just sit there, I put something on in the background and sketch, and I don't. It's really weird because I'm not actually actively thinking. Some thinking is happening in the background because my brain is directing where my hand is going. But I'm not actually thinking. It's happening somewhere in the subconscious. I'm just doing. And that's been really interesting to observe, almost kind of separate to myself. But it's also been really enjoyable because I've often found I get in my head a lot. I sit and, not so much ruminate, but like there's always a commentary going on, or there's something I'm thinking about. And doing this is almost like a substitute for meditation. It kind of gets me into that same space, and I can do it for hours.
Yeah, that's a really special aspect of all this. I think it's an important one. Thank you so much for joining me for the podcast. I have really, really enjoyed hearing your stories and being transported to these different amazing places. And yeah, it's been a joy to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really wonderful kind of sharing how much this has brought to my life in just such a short period of time. And I've always enjoyed traveling and I've enjoyed being outside, but it's just a whole new experience doing it with the mindset of nature journaling.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Talweez. I loved her reflection on the change that nature journaling has brought to the way she notices and wonders about nature, deepening this process and really opening her eyes to the world in a new way, even though exploring the world was already a big part of her life. I loved hearing the stories of nature in the Australian desert and on Christmas Island. These are definitely places I've always wanted to visit. And I enjoyed hearing about how nature journaling has brought so much richness into Talweez's life in just a short space of time. Please visit the show notes for this episode, where you'll find a link to Talweez's website of travels and trails and her Instagram page, where you can see her nature journals and nature art. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.